Jon Scheyer has led Duke one round further in each of his first three NCAA tournaments. Is this the year the Blue Devils make it back to the national championship?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, joined today by the great JJ Jackson of Locked On Blue Devils, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, in season or out of season. We're here for you 5 days a week. I want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned for more highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward segment, Mazda. Move and be moved. Well, folks, as you probably guessed, we are doing our Duke team preview episode today. Again, joined by JJ Jackson to break down this Duke team here. It is our 19th team preview. The goal was 25. I'm thinking we're going to get close to 30, maybe even a few more of these team previews done before the start of the college basketball season. There is a playlist on YouTube. I'll link to it here so that you guys can see that if you want to go back through all of these previews. Today, again, talking Duke, we're talking about the run to the Final Four last year, losing 5 players to the NBA, but also replenishing with some tremendous talent joining Coach Scheyer's club. We'll give some starting lineup predictions, talk about this ridiculously loaded non-conference slate, and give you some overall team predictions. JJ, let's start with last season. The Blue Devils 35-4 overall. That included going 19-1. Only a road loss to Clemson prevented them from being undefeated in conference play. We know the ACC was a little weaker last year, but hard to not feel good about what was a tremendous conference slate, even after a kind of a rough start to the season overall. 4-2, tough losses to Kentucky and Kansas, rattle off 16 straight wins, and obviously finish that regular season in a really, really good spot before getting into the big dance. JJ, want to talk more just collectively about the season last year. Obviously, Cooper Flagg, Kon Knipple, Kaman Maluak, an incredibly, ridiculously loaded group of freshmen all out the door in what was a prolific season for Duke that ended agonizingly close to making it back to the national championship game.
Without a doubt. I mean, you look back at last year's team and the entire starting 5 was all drafted into the NBA. It's only the second time that has ever happened. Mm-hmm. And when you think about things like that, it just goes to show how talented of a group it was. I'm with you, Andy. As soon as the season ended, mm-hmm. I was heartbroken that Duke was not able to win the whole thing, as it felt like at their best, they were as good as any of those teams in the Final Four and could have been the last team standing. They weren't. So immediately following that game, that loss itself stung and hurt so much. And to a degree, it still hurts. But the more time that I've had to reflect on it, it's allowed me to greater appreciate a 35-4 season that Duke was able to put together with some of the really impressive non-conference wins that they had. An ACC run, as you said, going 19-1. No one had ever done that before. The record for ACC wins in the regular season was 17. Duke got 19 of them. And now that this year they're going back down to just 18 conference games, maybe that record's going to hold forever if we don't see another change at some point down the line. So, yeah, just sitting here and reflecting, man, like I am so grateful that we got to watch that team and the talented freshmen coming in and the addition of Sion James and what he meant to that club, the junior season of Tyrese Proctor and how great he was. Like, just all in all, a really, really fun team to watch.
Absolutely. And it's funny because Houston also, as a team, won 19 games in the Big 12 last year, both the Big 12 and the ACC pulling back from 20 to 18 games. So there's a couple of records that might have been set last year for a really long time. I'm sure eventually conference realignment may change the number of conference games going forward. But for right now, it's kind of a fun record that Duke and Houston may hold for a while. And one thing that really, for Duke last year was not only that they got to the Final Four, but they made it look pretty easy. Like this is, I mean, they absolutely, I mean, you expect a 1 seed to dominate a 16 seed, but it was still a 44-point win for the Blue Devils over Mount St. Mary's, and then a 23-point win over an admittedly struggling Baylor team, but they still put them away quite easily. The only real close game until the Final Four was that win over Arizona, but it was still a game that it felt like Duke kind of controlled for a huge chunk of that game. Then you absolutely blast Alabama, 20-point win over the Crimson Tide to get into that Final Four before that agonizing loss to that same Houston club. Just an all-around dominant season for Duke right up until the very end. And we kind of teased it a little bit in the cold open there, but we have seen Jon Scheyer, and a big kind of part of the conversation when he took over for Coach K was, can he have that postseason success? And we've seen it gradually improve. This team lost in the round of 32 in 2023. They lost in the Elite Eight in 2024, and they lost in the Final Four this past year. So continuing to advance further and further, continuing to show more postseason success, even if last year felt, was pretty agonizing the way that it ended. Got to feel confident in Coach Scheyer's ability to keep winning more and more games in March.
Yeah, the experience is such an important piece of this, and the fact that this year's squad is going to have 5 guys coming back from the Final Four team a season ago is so important. Recently, Jon Scheyer even spoke to that and reminded people during his playing career, Andy, not many people had the 4-year playing career that he and Lance Thomas and Brian Zubek in their senior class had. Or in the first freshman year that Scheyer played for Duke, they were upset in the first round by VCU. His sophomore season, they lost in the round of 32 to West Virginia. His junior season, they lost in the Sweet 16. And then finally, his senior year, that class was able to go out on top, winning that national championship game over Butler. So the odds, the irony of it all, that his coaching career has started out the same way, that year by year, you're getting one step further into the journey. And so hopefully, you've got this trip coming up here to a national championship game.
And that's an incredible coincidence for Coach Scheyer, and hopefully something that he is, kind of hoping to continue to emulate with what would be a national championship win this year to keep that trend going. I don't think it'll be over Butler, but hey, you never know in this era. Maybe Butler will make some noise in the Big East, but we're going to get more into the roster specifically and the newcomers, and of course, as you alluded to, those returners from last year's Final Four team. But one departure, in addition to the entire starting lineup from last year, that I think is going to have a significant impact as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is Jay Lucas, who is obviously one of Duke's assistant coaches and had been there for a couple of years, and now he's over at Miami. He takes with him Shelton Henderson, who was a recruit that was committed to Duke that ends up going over to Miami. A lot of folks thought that there was a chance he would try to get the Boozer twins to stay in Miami. Obviously, the two of them have stayed committed to Duke. But Jay Lucas, even without losing the Boozer twins, you still lose a very, very good coach and somebody who I think had more of an impact on the program than maybe people will realize. What are your thoughts on what that might mean for this team going forward?
Yeah, great coach, great recruiter, and just an unbelievable guy that's certainly on the up-and-coming charts when it comes to coaching. Last season, a major story, that you finished this 19-1 regular season, and before you even play in the ACC tournament, he's off to be the Miami head coach because that's just where we're at in the sport, that you felt it was paramount to get started on building your roster right away. So you left the team a little bit early. And in some ways, Andy, I don't know that I should necessarily jump to this conclusion, but the fact that Duke was able to still keep humming the way they were, even in spite of his absence, gave me a whole lot of hope for what this squad would be able to do. He was such a key defensive coordinator for Duke this past season. And yet I think about the tournament run as you just laid it out. There were so many decisive wins that Duke had. Alabama hit the NCAA tournament record in 3-pointers in their Sweet 16 game, and then turning around in the Elite Eight, and Jon Scheyer and his staff were able to put together an incredible game plan, forcing them off the 3-point line, feeling comfortable with Kaman Malawach handling switches on his own out there on an island defensively. So I look at all of that and feel like Duke is going to continue to be able to move forward. I love the hires that Jon Scheyer has made this offseason. Another up-and-coming coach, and Evan Brads, who comes from the NBA to join the squad. Tyler Thornton, a former player under Coach K, comes back to join the coaching staff too. So I think they're in a really good spot. And I tell you, I'm just as excited about what Jay Lucas is going to do at Miami, and wish him all the best as well.
Well, like we said, Duke bringing back 5 key players from last year, as well as an elite freshman class. We talked a little bit about the Boozer twins. We'll get more into them. We'll talk about some of this team's other additions and how Coach Scheyer is going to put all of these pieces together in Durham this upcoming season. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, it is almost the weekend, and it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down for Duke. We're talking running back Anderson Castle. He delivered in a big way. He ran for 92 yards and 3 touchdowns in a 45-33 win over NC State. When the pressure was on, Castle came through, no hesitation and no delay. And just like Castle delivered for Duke, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you can save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, the NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. One of the great things about FanDuel is that it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sundays. FanDuel also has futures bets for college basketball. Duke plus 1,100 to take home the 2026 national championship. We'll give our thoughts later in the show. Duke has the 3rd best odds behind Purdue at plus 900 and Houston at plus 1,100. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. All right, folks, segment 2 here. Still Andy Patton, still joined by the great JJ Jackson of Locked On Blue Devils, and we are still knocking out our Duke team preview episode. We talked about last year, Jon Scheyer's growth as a coach and continued moving further in the NCAA tournament. Now we're going to take a look at what this roster looks like heading into next season. And obviously the excitement is around the newcomers. It's around the incoming freshmen, and we are going to talk about that. But in this era of college basketball, so often the best way to succeed is to retain talent. And Duke so rarely loses key pieces to the transfer portal. They obviously lose players to the NBA, like we talked about with their starting 5. But for the most part, if you're leaving Duke, it's to go play professionally, or it's because you were out of eligibility. And we look at this roster, and you have really key returners. You have Malik Brown coming back, Patrick Nubangwa's coming back. You have the 2 guards, Isaiah Evans and Caleb Foster coming back, Darren Harris. Like, this feels like a unit and a group that now that they have that experience, they're coming back from that Final Four run. Like, as much as the Boozers and Heminia and the other freshmen are going to be a huge factor for this team, JJ, it feels like these returners are going to be the difference between this team getting back to that national championship conversation or falling a little short.
No doubt. It's awesome to have them to kind of fall back on and know that they've been there before. Now, granted, for all of these guys, it's definitely going to take a step up in what you did a season ago. Mm-hmm. But for each of them specifically, I feel really good in that. This will now be the 3rd year that Caleb Foster has been in the Duke basketball program, and it's been an up and down career for him so far. But thinking about at different points last season, it felt like an almost certainty that this guy was going to bail at the end of the year. And that's exactly what did not happen. He remained committed to Duke in an era in which no one really does that. They go and run and find the next opportunity for them. So really fired up for him to come back for another season. You go into the interior. I love what Pat Gongba was able to do throughout the second half of the season there, getting more and more comfortable. It's a shame for him as a freshman that he was just positioned behind a top 10 pick in Kaman Malawach. But I think college basketball fans are truly going to get to know how talented of a low post scorer, soft hand, soft touch that Pat Gongba has. Malik Brown, defensive pest. I think we're going to expect the same out of him this upcoming season. And then Darren Harris is a guy that I have talked about a lot on Locked On Blue Devils lately, a knockdown shooter who's really going to benefit from more of a playing opportunity. And there's one name I left out on purpose here, Andy, and that's Isaiah Evans, because I am most excited about Duke being able to hold on to him for a sophomore season. As much as Cameron Boozer will be a part of the conversation, and rightfully so, Isaiah Evans will dictate how good of a basketball team this can be for Duke, and he will get tons and tons of headlines across. I think you guys will be talking about him a whole lot here on Locked On College Basketball, because I think Isaiah Evans is going to be that good.
Yeah, Isaiah Evans to me is the biggest X factor for this team. I know that Cameron Boozer is going to be good. I know that he's going to be great. I think Caleb Foster is going to take the leap. I think Darren Harris is going to be an impactful player. And I think, as you mentioned, Pat Gongba and Malik Brown are going to be great kind of offensive, defensive, low post threats for this team. And even guys like Kamenia and Sarr and others are going to play their roles. But to me, this team reaching that threshold, this team being a true national championship contender, the difference between the ceiling and the floor for Duke, which we'll talk about later in the show, so much of it in my mind hinges on Isaiah Evans taking that leap. Like, that to me feels like if you were a genie and you could give Duke one thing that you knew they would be able to do this year, that I think would be the most important thing outside of like injury prevention or anything that will help this team. Because I think Isaiah Evans is that dude, and we just didn't get to see it last year, in part because he had a bit of an up and down year, but also the role just wasn't really there. As you mentioned, 5 guys in the NBA who started for this team last year, and to me, Evans, if he can be somebody who grabs hold of a big role and does multiple different things to help this team, that's the difference between this team being, again, a good team that maybe wins the ACC, gets a decent seed, makes the Sweet 16, versus a team that legitimately has a chance to win a national championship.
Yeah, Showtime Slim is what he likes to go by. And for Isaiah Evans this past season in that Auburn game, he was huge for Duke, hitting 6 3-pointers in the first half to really save them in that big-time showdown. For the year, this is a guy that shot at the 40% clip mark from 3-point range. I mean, an absolute sniper by every sense of the word. But standing at 6'5", 6'6", he's got some bounce to him as well, and that kind of element to his game I'm excited to see, Andy. A season ago, Isaiah Evans shot 82% of his shots from beyond the 3-point line. I'm excited that he gets to show off a little bit more of a shot diet, right? Not relying so much on just catching and making open 3-pointers, putting the ball on the deck and finding other places to operate.
Looking ahead at the freshman class here, we've obviously talked about the Boozers. You have Cameron Boozer coming in, 6'9" power forward, third-ranked player in the class, kind of part of that big three alongside AJ Dybansa and Darren Peterson, who are at BYU and Kansas, respectively. And then, of course, Boozer's twin brother, Caden Boozer, coming to campus as well, ranked 23rd in the class. And then you have Nick Kamenia coming in, number 15 ranked player in the class, a 6'8" forward, kind of a versatile stretch 4 type player from California. And then Sebastian Wilkins, number 47 ranked player. All these rankings, by the way, from 247 Sports, 6'8" forward, joining the team as well. And then, you have the international edition in Dame Sarr, a guy who kind of seems to be a pivot for Duke when they weren't going to get Cedric Coward, who they'd landed in the transfer portal out of Washington State. Coward opted to stay in the draft process. Probably a smart move for Cedric as he got picked in the lottery. And then Duke pivots to go land an 18-year-old in Dame Sarr, who's a very prolific, well-rounded, if a bit raw player that's coming into this program right away. To me, Sarr, if Evans may be the biggest X factor, but Sarr's ability to contribute from day one feels very crucial to this team. Obviously, that is also true of the Boozers and Kamenia, but for Sarr, it feels like, again, he's a ceiling raiser in a pretty significant way if he can be the kind of player that I'm sure many Duke fans are hoping he can.
Yeah, when you've got FC Barcelona experience and then you're walking into the college basketball game, that's just such a unique opportunity for Dame Sarr, and I think he's going to be able to rely on that and be a guy that Duke can certainly rely on. The Blue Devils, we look at this roster, 5 returners, 5 freshmen, and it's a roster that includes 2 pivots that Duke had to make. As you mentioned, Andy, one of them being, Cedric Coward staying in the draft and Duke going and landing Dame Sarr. Great job on the coaching staff and able to do that. The other pivot they had to make is something you also touched on a little bit earlier, where Duke already had the signed letter of intent from Shelton Henderson to come be a freshman who's a 5-star player coming into this year of college basketball. But then he asks for his release from that letter of intent, ends up at Miami, which is why Duke then had to pivot really late and get Sebastian Wilkins to reclass, come into school early, and be ready to go for this Duke team this upcoming season. But yeah, of the freshmen, I'm definitely looking at Dame Sarr and then Nick Kamenia with what he was able to do this summer, playing with Team USA, their U19 team in Switzerland, winning the gold medal in the FIBA championship for them. I think those will definitely be X factors, guys that can shoot it from the outside and also aren't afraid to set their teammates up either.
Well, I made a projected starting 5 for this team, and then after I made the list, I went and looked at John Rothstein's projected starting 5, and it is the same, which hopefully is a good sign for my thoughts on this team. But I'm curious your thoughts, JJ, as somebody who's pretty plugged into this program. I'm projecting the 2 returning guards, Foster and Evans, are both starting in the backcourt. And then you got a pair of freshmen, Cameron Boozer, very obviously going to start. In fact, Scheyer's already talked about the excitement about having him kind of play more of the 4 as opposed to playing the 5. I think he said, he was telling John Rothstein, like, he has always been the biggest guy on the floor, and now he's not necessarily going to have to be that, which to me is a pretty good indication he's going to start at the 4. I think Pat Ngamba is going to start at the 5. You could start Malik Brown there, but I'm guessing it's going to be Pat starting in that spot. And then Dame Sarr starting at the 3. So again, that would be Foster, Evans, Sarr, Boozer, and Ngamba. Is that kind of what you expect this starting 5 to look like for this team?
That's exactly where I've landed, Andy, in that exact same spot. I think recent conversation, as you know, practice weeks have arrived here and we're getting warmed up, is maybe there's a possibility that it's Hamenia that wins out that spot over Dame Sarr, but I do think it'll be one of the talented freshmen that get into that spot for Duke. And then, yeah, I mean, this is a team that, you know, I feel like we haven't touched on Cameron Boozer as much because he's already had the conversations around him with how sought after of a recruit that he was, but definitely a guy that every team in America is going to be scouting against for the Duke basketball squad. And the hype is certainly real with how good of a player he's going to be. It's unfortunate that you've got to follow in Cooper Flagg's footsteps with the season that he just put together. But I know that the talent is there. Recently, we talked about this, and you're a big college basketball guy, Andy, so I'll throw it your way. This feels like in Duke circles, if you go back to 2018, 2019, where you had Marvin Bagley III as Duke's top recruit, the very next year was Zion Williamson. We've got here Cooper Flagg with the very next year, Cameron Boozer. So if you were to flip it in reverse, you know, with Cooper and Zion being the equivalents there, and then in terms of level of hype, Bagley to Boozer, like it's a really interesting dynamic. And all of these players ended up having amazing freshman seasons for Duke.
Boozer's so interesting to me because, you know, he's obviously going to draw comparisons to those previous players. He's going to draw comparisons to Cooper, which he's not a very similar player to Cooper, so it's a little bit unfair. He's going to draw comparisons to some of these other great Dukies. But for me, the Paolo Banchero comparison is what's kind of interesting to me. Physically, they're both, I mean, they're both just built like absolutely monstrous dudes, especially freshmen. I cannot believe how big Cameron Boozer is. And Banchero, I mean, he just bulldozed his way to wherever spots he wanted to be. And he's been doing that in the NBA. Boozer to me feels very similar to that. And if you can play him in a role, you know, not where he's not down at the basket all the time and he can play away from the rim a little bit, my goodness, the ability that he's going to have to put the ball on the deck, to get to his spots, to get his looks, it just feels like there's so little reason to doubt that he will be one of the most prolific scorers and overall offensive players in all of college basketball this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Paolo comparison is one that a lot of people are making, and I think it's spot on. I'm excited to see the shooting ability from Cameron Boozer and what that will be able to do spacing-wise for this team. But he won every single year in AAU at the national level. He won every single state championship at Christopher Columbus High School there in Miami. He won national finals. I mean, the Boozer twins are winners, and hopefully that continues this season.
Well, one of the things that will test this team early, and this young team in particular, is a incredibly tough non-conference schedule. Arguably one of, if not the very best one in terms of competition level in all of college basketball. Coach Scheyer is pretty clearly preparing this team for a title run. We're going to talk about that schedule and make some predictions for how he thinks this team is going to do this year, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, this episode is brought to you by Mazda's moving the game forward for those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. And this week's moment in college basketball that moved the game forward, pretty clearly Bruce Pearl's sudden retirement at Auburn, passing the torch to his son, Stephen Pearl, who will take over for the Tigers going forward. The pressure's on for Stephen. He's got a very talented roster for Auburn, but obviously somebody without head coaching experience. It'll be very, very interesting to see how this Auburn club looks in the first year of the post-Bruce Pearl era. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected, in this case, a coaching change, is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our conversation about the Duke Blue Devils here with JJ Jackson of Locked On Blue Devils. We're going to talk about this team's incredible non-conference slate. And if you're an everyday listener to Locked On College Basketball, you have heard Isaac and I talk about this schedule already because it is one of the best non-conference schedules I have seen a team put together, especially a team of Duke's caliber, in a long time. I'm not going to read every game. Usually we just read the highlights, but most of these games do feel like highlights for Duke this year. The exhibition schedule, they'll host Central Florida, and then they will play at Tennessee for their 2 exhibition games. And then on November 18th, they will play Kansas in New York. Then on November 27th, they will play Arkansas in Chicago. That'll be a real fun one. Then they take on the defending champion Florida Gators on December 2nd at Cameron Indoor. And then they play at Michigan State on December 6th, a true road game out in East Lansing. Then they got Texas Tech on that December 20th, which, folks, please don't make any plans other than watching college basketball on December 20th because there are like 15 phenomenal games scheduled that day. And then for Duke, that's not the end of their non-conference because they will also play Michigan in Washington, D.C. on February 21st, a fun mid-conference season game, one of those non-conference games in the middle of the conference slate. We love seeing those. And I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight another game on Duke's schedule that I'm very excited about. November 11th, Duke on the road at Army, kind of a fun celebration on Veterans Day, celebration of Coach K and his background with Army. Really, really fun to see a team like Duke play a true road game against a mid-major program, against a program like Army. I'm really excited for that game as well. And again, like even the quote unquote buy games on Duke's schedule. Indiana State is a very, very good mid-major program. Lipscomb is a good mid-major program. Like this is, and I missed a game. I also missed Texas, who they are opening against.
Very first game of the year. Yeah.
Very first game of the year is taking on Texas in Charlotte. So this is just, JJ, this is an incredible schedule that Duke, there will not be anybody who can say that Duke was not prepared for the NCAA tournament this year because this schedule is more than worthy of preparing you for whatever you could see in the big dance.
Yeah, it makes me really excited to see these matchups take place. I mean, like right out of the gates, to play a school like Texas on a neutral site, you don't see that every single year. Typically, it feels like we're used to seeing some bye games to open up the season before you jump into those tough competitions. You mentioned the Champions Classic matchup that Duke's got there, testing themselves against Kansas. And then Thanksgiving night, you're playing Arkansas in Chicago. Everybody's going to get to watch a couple of the NFL games. And then the nightcap being Duke and Arkansas. What a great one that is to watch out. Duke's got the return trip to Michigan State, which we saw this game played at Duke a couple of seasons ago in the COVID year when they didn't have the Champions Classic at a neutral site. They played home and homes. Duke owes Michigan State a return trip. And so they'll be able to do that there. Texas Tech, like you said. And I love what Duke did with the Illinois game this past season. And yes, I know that the final score, winning by 43, it's like, of course you loved it. But the whole idea that, okay, in the middle of conference play, let's reset, let's regroup, let's go back to a neutral site where you play tournament games in neutral sites against a team that you expect to be there. So shout out to this the coaching staff for being able to put a game like Michigan on their schedule. Shout out to Michigan for agreeing to something like this. I think both parties can benefit from this schedule. So elite non-conference as we're labeling it. And I think that is so fitting.
And you know, I think Some people will probably look at this as maybe a correction for the ACC, which was frankly pretty weak last year. You had 3 teams that won 18 or more games, Duke, Louisville, and Clemson. And then after that, there was a pretty big drop off in production. North Carolina was not themselves last year. And we saw a lot of programs that just frankly really struggled. And for those of you who missed it, Isaac and I did do our ACC preview. And we do think the conference is going to be better. Coaching changes at NC State and Virginia and Miami, as we've talked about on this show, as well as Florida State, I think will help this conference be much better this year. And a stronger ACC coupled with this schedule, I mean, puts Duke in a position, like I said, where they're going to be into March as battle tested as anybody in this entire sport. But looking at the conference, I do think the ACC will be better. I think Virginia is going to be much improved with Ryan Odom. NC State's going to be much improved with Will Wade. I don't think there's much debate about that, but I still think that the best teams are going to still be the best teams. Duke, Louisville, North Carolina. We'll see if Clemson stays at the top. They lost a lot of talent. I think they might drop a bit, but this is a league that's still going to be dominated by some of those kind of traditional ACC powerhouse programs. For you, looking at the schedule, knowing that you got North Carolina and Louisville twice, knowing that you got your first road trip out to Cal and Stanford, which you have not done yet because it wasn't on the schedule for Duke last year. You also got you guys are taking on SMU on the road too, I think, or
at
maybe
home.
not. Well, you just got them at home. So you don't got the Dallas trip, but you do got the California road trip. How are you feeling? Are you feeling another 19-1 type season, or I guess it would be 17-1 season for Duke this year? You feeling like it's going to be a similar situation? And ultimately, do you think they're going to be the team winning the regular season for this conference this year?
I definitely do. Right here today, I think Duke is the best team in the ACC. I think you start the conversation with them and what they were able to do a season ago, bringing all the guys back in this freshman class, like we talked about. I'm in agreement with you. I think that the league as a whole has absolutely gotten better. And now that they've reworked the schedule to drop it down to 18 games from the 20-game mark that it was, it's for Duke unfortunate that when you put together your team schedule, there are 2 teams that you're going to play twice. Duke's always going to play North Carolina twice, not arguing against that. The other team they get this year is Louisville. So there are going to be opportunities for them to be tested within the conference slate. The one school we've already talked about a little bit, who I'm excited to see year one of Miami, I do think, Andy, it is an absolute shame and a miss on the conference to not have a single Duke and Miami matchup this season. That's the one team Duke does not have a game against, considering the Jay Lucas connection, Shelton Henderson being there. Jay Lucas went and hired Christopher Columbus's high school coach that coached the Boozer twins to now be his assistant. So we won't see that matchup there, and I think that's a shame. But overall, really excited to see Duke go through the ACC this season, and I think it's totally fair to set them at number 1 in any conference power rankings that people start to put together for the ACC.
Yeah, I think there's only one team that anybody could reasonably put ahead of Duke and not have a bunch of backlash, and that would be Louisville. As much as I think North Carolina's improved, I don't think it's particularly reasonable to have them ahead of Duke and Louisville. I think those are the top 2 teams by a fairly considerable margin. After that, there's a bit of a drop, but I think Duke's going to win this league. And JJ, what I want to do now is give you my kind of ceiling and floor for Duke this year and kind of hear your thoughts on it. For very few teams in college basketball, the ceiling is this, but for Duke, it is. The ceiling is that they are the number 1 overall seed, that they win a national championship. Like, there is no debate in my mind that Duke not only is capable of doing that, but that they are one of 3 or 4 teams that are highly favored to potentially do that. Are they going to go undefeated? Probably not, especially not with this non-conference schedule. But the Boozer twins are winners. They continue to win at every single stop, and there's not really any reason to believe they will not continue to win. And for this Duke team, if they continue that kind of tradition, if Herminia and Sarr are guys who are able to adjust to the college level and the physicality of playing at this level right away, if Foster and Evans take the leap, we talked about Isaiah Evans in particular being a huge X factor for this team. If all that happens, and if your kind of offense-defense trade-off in the front court with Brown and Gamba ends up working out, this is an absolutely strong national championship contender. The floor for this team is still pretty good. I'd be shocked if Duke finished lower than 3rd. Frankly, I'd be shocked if they finished 3rd in the ACC. That would be very surprising to me, but anything lower than that just does not feel feasible, barring like a significant injuries or something like really unprecedented happening. I think the floor for this team is probably like a third place finish in the conference. It's, still probably a single digit seed, maybe just more like a 6 seed, something like that, 5 seed maybe, and then just an early exit in the tournament. And that floor would be like the 2 returning guards really not taking the leap at all in Evans and Foster. It would be the front court depth being an issue for this team, or Gongba not taking that leap offensively in the way that he needs to. And maybe it's Sarr or Herminia. The physicality of college basketball just ends up being more for them than we thought it would be, and they struggle. But to me, this team's much more likely to meet the floor than the ceiling in my mind, or the ceiling than the floor in my mind. But it feels like either way, there's very little chance of a bad Duke season. It's just a matter of, can they actually be a team that makes that Final Four again and contends for a title or not?
Andy, you've taken the reins of Locked On Blue Devils in the past, this past season, helping me out a few times. And you could do it right now. I mean, spot on exactly how I feel about this team. And I think really when I hear from everydayers, I think that they're all in agreement as well. We already mentioned in the betting markets, you see Duke there towards the top as title favorites when you look at what they're going to be able to do this upcoming season. And then the ACC, like we talked about, it's very clear you're at the top of the conference. Duke is one of the very, very few programs in the sport where the expectation year in and year out is to compete and win a national championship. And when you look at the talent, the financial resources that they put into the recruiting and the arms races, all of the draft picks that Duke has every single season, it makes sense why they're in that conversation. We're already looking at drafts for 2026, and you see Duke guys all over the place at the next level. So when you see that collection of talent, totally fair to set the ceiling as high as winning this whole thing. And then for the floor, you're right. The questions are, do those returners take that next step in the game? The physicality piece that you talked about with Sarr and Herminia, spot on. And then front court depth. We saw Malik Brown last season dislocate his shoulders a couple of times. He just had a minor knee procedure, Malik Brown, over the offseason. So certainly a concern, but all in all, I'm very optimistic with what Duke will be able to do this season.
JJ Jackson, Locked On Blue Devils, love to have you on the show. This is fantastic. That's going to wrap it up for us today here in our Duke team preview, folks. Thanks again for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Like we said, we're coming up on our 20th team preview. We're also doing our conference previews as well. So keep with us here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We got another conference preview for you to close out the week. More of these team previews coming next week. But as always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. And until next time, peace out.